Good afternoon, everybody. Happy New Year. I'm Karen Biddle-Andres, the Director of Policy and Market Solutions and the Project Director of the Retirement Savings Initiative here at the Aspen Institute Financial Security Program. And first and foremost, on this chilly January day, at the beginning of 2022, a rockier year than we had hoped so far, we hope all of you and your families are safe and well and healthy. We are thrilled to have you with us today as we spend some time with some retirement savings leaders from across sectors, looking ahead to the year to come and where we can seek and find the momentum that we need to get us toward a retirement savings system that is more accessible, that is more inclusive, more equitable, more portable. So we're looking forward to the conversation today. So for those of you who are newer to the world of retirement savings, I want to just begin by framing the story, right? So as we see it, here are some stats that kind of paint a picture of retirement savings in America. Retirement savings represent the second largest source of household wealth in the US after home ownership. And that means it's working really well for a lot of people. But retirement savings levels vary greatly. And the most egregious gap that we see is the racial retirement savings gap. Per the survey of Consumer Finances, the average retirement account balance for a white household in America is $168,000. It's $38,000 for the average Black household and $27,000 for the average Hispanic household. Some stats that tell why. Part of it, the 45 million workers who don't have access to workplace retirement savings. There are 24 million workers who have access to workplace retirement savings but don't participate. So we have some work to do to ensure that everyone not only has access to workplace retirement savings, but they can use it and they can reap the benefits of the wealth building potential of this system. And how we're going to do that, how we're going to get to that system that is more accessible, portable, and equitable. That's what we discuss. That's what we debate. And those are the solutions that we incubate here at the Aspen Leadership Forum on retirement savings. I do want to thank the sponsors of our Aspen Leadership Forum on retirement savings in 2022, AARP, BlackRock, Prudential, and T. Rowe Price. So before we get to the discussion, I have just two items of business. First, I do want to shamelessly promote some research that we have recently put forward. Actually, I should say briefs. These are reports that summarize a year of dialogue last year at the Aspen Leadership Forum on retirement savings. They are brief. They are statistics that paint a picture, that tell the story of where we are on the key vectors of potential change and opportunity in the system. But they also give an anonymous aggregated view inside the heads of cross-sector leaders as they participated in dialogue throughout the year. These are meant to be primers for people who are less familiar with our retirement savings system, as well as a resource for experts who want to get inside the heads of leaders. So we're thrilled with these and we want you to use them as tools in your work. My second piece of housekeeping is about how to engage in the dialogue today. So we do want you to make liberal use of the chat feature if you want to comment and participate. We also would love for you to submit your questions for speakers in the Q&A feature at the bottom center of your screen, and we will be monitoring those and doing our best to incorporate them into the flow of the dialogue as we go. So with that, I'd like to go ahead and transition directly to our conversation. I am thrilled that we get to kick off today's dialogue with a discussion of both the federal and state policy landscape where we are in retirement savings. So I would like to invite Kendra Isaacson and Lisa Messina to turn on their cameras and their mics. Hey, Kendra. Hey, Lisa. So Kendra is Senior Pensions Counsel for the U.S. Senate Committee on Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions. And Lisa is the CEO of Messina and Associates, and also the former director of Oregon Saves, really the first state auto-IRA plan. So welcome, Kendra and Lisa. And I say, let's get right into it. You guys are both, you're veterans, right? You know this space from different vantage points. I kind of want to know, like, where are you looking? Where are you looking right now for momentum and action? Like, what's getting you excited, if anything, right now about retirement savings? Kendra, I'll go to you first.
All right. And before I give my remarks, I have to always give the standard Hill disclaimer that my remarks are mine and mine alone and are not for attribution and are off the record. So with that, I think there's a lot to be excited about in retirement. On the Hill right now, there is, not a lot of areas of bipartisan agreement right now. If you watch the news a lot and you're paying attention to various policy struggles, but retirement is actually one right area where there is a fair amount of agreement. I think it's because everyone has that shared goal of retiring. Maybe our methods of getting there might be a little different, but on the House side, we have had 2 retirement bills pass out of committee, the committees of jurisdiction, with unanimous bipartisan support in House Ways and Means and Ed and Labor. And now it's the Senate's turn, and I am working very closely with my Senate Finance colleagues and with my colleagues across the aisle on the Help Committee, and we are crafting what everyone is calling Secure 2.0, but we'll probably have 4 different names by the time each corner has their say with it. But, we are right now negotiating and talking about how we want to approach all of the various things that we think we can address with bipartisan agreement. So, our committee will be having probably a hearing in the next couple of months. We're going to mark up our version of the bill. As I mentioned, we're working very closely with finance. Sometimes we don't work that closely together. We're more at odds and there's a little tension with the jurisdiction. But now we're going to try to work together to make a better bill and respect those corners of jurisdiction and produce complementary bills rather than competing packages. And so I really think that before the end of this year, we are going to see a retirement package pass, become law. And I didn't do this for a long time with Secure because that was a process. But for this one, I feel very confident that we will see something get across the finish line with really broad bipartisan, bicameral support. So I think that is something to really be excited about. And, for the past couple of years, there's been a lot of movement in retirement, both bipartisan and obviously more partisan with the American Rescue Plan, dealing with an issue that has really been a big one for us with the multi-employer pensions. But now that we've, kind of we've addressed we've done the triage there. That's the word I'm looking for. We didn't solve it completely, but we did a pretty good job. Now we can focus on everybody else and getting more people into the system.
I'm going to come back to that in a second. Thank you. Lisa, where are you looking? Where do you think momentum's going to come from?
So I'm going to agree with Kendra. I think it is a very exciting time. I'll look in a few different places from a federal legislation perspective. And also, when I look back over the last 5 years, there's just been a lot of movement in the retirement savings improvement, retirement savings coverage space, both innovation in the private sector and certainly innovation in the public sector. I think I've seen more innovation from states in terms of things that are moving the needle right now, but the federal activity is really critical and very important. So it's a pretty cool time to be working in this kind of space. And I hope everyone on the line with you is working in this space and enjoying just the fresh air that we're all experiencing.
I want to come back to this question of expanding access, right? We had in the fall, we had the provision for a national requirement for universal access requirement, specifically with automatic enrollment, and it didn't make it through. What does that tell us, if anything? Maybe nothing. What does that tell us? What have we learned about the path forward here? What is the path forward to universal coverage for automatic enrollment into workplace retirement savings? What's next?
Well, yeah. I'll try to jump in with like an optimistic look at it. I think doing a mandate, a universal program through reconciliation would really politicize this, and the knee-jerk reaction from our friends across the aisle would be to pull it back when they come into power. So I think we're all very disappointed. I mean, Build Back Better is kind of stalled anyway. So even if it had been successful there, it would still be in legislative purgatory over here in the Senate. But, I do think there is a desire to close the gap. I don't know. I don't have the answer right now for how to get buy-in from our friends across the aisle, but maybe if we can work together, you know, this like having success in this secure 2.0 world could beget more success and better relationships that we're really working together toward a common goal. Perhaps that's how we get there. But you know, I think we're very determined to make this happen. And I can't give you the path forward just yet, but we haven't lost hope. So I think we're working on that. And I think Lisa has a much more interesting perspective because the states are much more nimble than we are at the federal level.
Well, and I'll add to that. So losing universal coverage from Build Back Better was disappointing, right? Because I think that federal action is going to be the fastest way to expand coverage to the most people, right? But I totally agree with you. It's actually okay with me that our legislative processes are slow because they enable us to perfect what or improve what ultimately gets passed and to get more buy-in. And I would say what I think, Karen, will ultimately help this happen, I think pressure from the states, right? So we now have 11 states, 10 and a half states with auto-IRA programs, either live or in the process of going live. And that's pretty close to a quarter of the states in the country, right? And we're now talking about 45 million uncovered people instead of 57 million, which is who we were talking about a couple of years ago. So I do think the pressure from the states, and what I mean by pressure is you hear a lot that nobody wants to see 50 different programs, and they have a ton of commonality, but they're all just a tiny bit unique, right? But also the proof that comes from the states of, hey, guess what? People actually want this. And turns out if you make it available, they're going to use it and they're going to appreciate it. I think that helps, people who maybe of the opinion that things are fine the way they are, or you could build it, but nobody's coming. This is a way to show that, in fact, yeah, people will use it if you make it available.
So as I sit here in a deep purple state, you may know I live in Michigan, where there's no activity I'm aware of thus far on an auto-IRA. I find myself wondering, if we sort of let this run for a while at the state level, right? And all the benefits that you raised, Lisa, right? Testing, experimentation, we learn, we perfect, we converge on a model. Are we in danger of creating some like a bifurcated wealth building system in the US, where if you live in a state that has one, you're on one track. And if you live on a state that doesn't, in a state that you're on another track, is there danger? I also can't help but notice that there's a bit of a red, at this moment in time, there's a bit of a red-blue state divide in terms of which states are going for it and which states aren't. What do you think? Is that fear ill-founded?
Yeah. Well, so I guess my short answer would be yes-ish. Let's remember that we're in a deeply bifurcated circumstance right now, right? There's absolutely haves and have-nots. And it's interesting to me that when you have someone who's in a lower paid job, it's more okay to not offer them the benefits or the access to retirement because you say, well, they can't afford to save. So anyway, we're already in a pretty bifurcated place. I will say this, I think we're seeing some really great results. And because of that, I also think that, and I'm going to share a little bit about what I see in the environment, Karen, if that's okay. Sure. And also what I think this means in response to your question. But what I've seen over the last maybe 12 to 18 months, and we're seeing it currently, is that the state programs have just become a normal part of the landscape, right? They're not scary anymore. Everybody knows kind of what they look like and how they operate. Instead of being disruptive to the current structure, what we've seen is new plan formation has risen significantly in states that have auto-IRA deadlines. They motivate employers to start plans if they don't want to facilitate the state program. So I think that ought to be relieving some concern and pressure. We are currently, so this is as of December 31, so we're at about funded accounts, so 430,000. So from zero to, I'll say almost 500,000 in just a couple of years' time. Those savers, $50 and $60 at a time, have accumulated about $410 million of personal retirement savings / emergency savings in their IRA accounts. I think that's a really significant proof point. So what we are seeing is, yes, this is something where I think there was legislative success first in bluer states, but we're also seeing across the country, regardless of stripe or color, that states are introducing legislation and having increasing success in getting that to be discussed and aired, which is really important. Those conversations are critical. And then also success in passing. So, I'll just throw in a couple names, fresh legislation for 2022, and hopefully this is useful and not everyone do good things, not bad things with this information. But Pennsylvania, Hawaii, Rhode Island, and maybe a little redder, Mississippi, Missouri, right? So, and in some of these states, ledge is being introduced for not the first time, maybe it's the second or the third time, but in my experience, ledge needs to be out there multiple times in order for it to get people's awareness, for people to get comfortable, ask good questions, for it to get shaped up, et cetera. So happy to see it.
Lisa, you mentioned something about employers having the excuse that even the lowest income workers don't want to save. And we have a GAO study that is a couple years old now. I'm curious if that would have changed, but it showed that when given the opportunity, even the lowest quartile income workers will save and they will stick to it. So access is really, really key here.
Thank you, Kendra. And I bet people are going to want to see that study. It's what we're seeing in the state programs. I will say the flip side of that is the opt-out rate for the state programs. When people are offered it, it's about 30% or about a third. And I think when you consider the fact that we're covering everyone, regardless of how many hours they get in their work week or what sort of compensation they're receiving, high, low, or how variable it is, I think it's pretty normal that you would see a bunch of people decide either, I've never heard of this, no way, not yet, or I can't afford it right now. But, turning that around the other way, you've got 68% who are saying yes, and who are, actively participating in the savings process.
I want to come back to the issue of this being a bipartisan, about retirement having been a bipartisan issue, right? And at least some of the early data that I'm hearing and seeing from the states with an automatic enrollment requirement is that the private sector, that there is evidence of private sector success, right? Drafting off of the requirement to auto-enroll workers. Right? This is an opportunity to help employers get compliant. And I keep getting multiple data points. I mean, Kendra, as we continue to want to keep retirement policy a bipartisan issue, what data points, what sources of kind of support do we need? And do we understand everything we need to understand about the role of retirement savings in people's lives in terms of wealth building? Are we framing this the right way?
I mean, I think that's a great question. I wish I had the answer. I think I would be solving lots of problems if I could answer that very big question. I work on the health committee, the labor, education. It really is all interrelated here. So sometimes I try to take a step back and think about it, wages are a big issue. People don't feel like they have the ability or the room to save. So that's one issue. So if we could raise wages, I think that would be helpful. If people felt like they had extra to save, but also, that comes back to the wage gap, and that can explain some of the disparities in savings among, gender and along racial lines. They're very stark numbers when you think about the compounding of the wage gap over the course of a career. And so, can we address some of these systemic issues that will then help build stronger retirement and a more, financially secure future that is it's obviously very related to retirement, but it's not like us talking about the benefits of auto enrollment and auto portability and things like that, where I think that is really helping move the needle for people who are already in the system. But how do we get to those people who do opt out and they make that decision? And we're trying to get creative and think about this. We have been entertaining the idea of auto re-enrollment. If you have to re-up your flexible spending accounts every year, you have to think about, oh gosh, next year I need to buy eyeglasses. I need this in my flexible spending account. Well, behavioral economics would tell you, if that first time you're offered retirement savings and you say, not now, I don't want to do this, that you're never coming back to that decision. And so we would like to maybe have that as something that forces people to think about it every year. Like maybe your fortunes change, maybe you get a raise and you're like, this is the year I can add in a little, I can start contributing a little bit. So, these aren't revolutionary changes, but we're trying to operate within the system that we have and really pull more people into the system and help create better retirement outcomes. But I would be remiss as a member of the help committee if I didn't also make the plea for everything that my labor team is fighting for, because I do think that ultimately that will help have better retirement outcomes as well.
Well, let's actually talk about some of the, Kendra and Lisa, I kind of want to know what you're excited about in Secure 2.0, right? Of course, all the data show that the universal access requirement is going to do the most, but when we have holes of 24 million people who have access to a plan but don't use it, that's a pretty big gap. That's like almost as many people in Canada, right? That's a nation's worth of people. So I'd love to hear what some of those important but maybe lesser known kind of fixes are that you are looking for, whether it's in Secure 2.0 or Lisa, whether it's some of the things that the state plans are cooking up. What you got?
Well, yeah, Kendra, go first.
Okay, I'll be quick because I want to hear what you have to say too. This is as much a panel for me to learn what you guys are doing as well. So for Secure 2.0, I don't know if it's one of the hidden ones, but it's one I'm really excited about. Senator Murray has introduced the Women's Retirement Protection Act for a number of years. And one of the provisions in that is expanding coverage to part-time workers. We made a little success in Secure 1.0, where we expanded coverage to part-time workers who work 500 hours in 3 consecutive years. But if you're full-time and you have to work 1,000 hours, it makes sense to have 502 consecutive years. I think that will pull in a lot of part-time workers. And so I'm really excited about that. And there is a lot of support for that provision on both sides of the aisle. So we are, that is great. Another piece from our Women's Retirement Protection Act that I think is really important is flying a little under the radar, a little bit more controversial. Its success looks a little more murky, but I'm going to make the plug for it anyway, is that, we should have spousal protections in the DC world. DB world has them. And we are looking at how we can improve retirement security for women. And as you mentioned earlier, Karen, retirement savings is often one of your biggest asset, if not your biggest asset. And so right now, if I am in my mid 40s. If I want to go buy a boat with my retirement savings, which would be a terrible idea, but I don't have to have my husband sign off on that. Fortunately, we're 2 working members of our household, but that's not the case for everyone. And so, we'd like to include some more guardrails there. But I think that one is probably a much longer path to success. So I'm going to kick it over to Lisa.
Thank you, Kendra. So I'll just say, I also love the expansion of coverage for part-time workers, because I think that the 401k/defined contribution infrastructure that we have in the US today, it takes its hits, but I think it has a lot of wonderful elements, and getting more people to participate there, I think, is absolutely a terrific thing. I'm sure I'm not the only person who says this, but I sometimes think of the state auto-IRA programs as training wheels for employers to ultimately be able to offer some form of a 401k or defined contribution plan as they are ready. I do want to circle back, Karen, to something you mentioned with regard to what gets people thinking about these sorts of changes. And of course, legislators and other policymakers, we all have the things that pluck at our heartstrings. So for some people, they know that expanding coverage and changing family wealth is the right thing to do. Other people might be motivated by the fact that there are significant tax savings to be had here. And so I'm just going to throw out some of the numbers at the state level. So Colorado, Virginia, and Pennsylvania have been able to identify $10 billion, $12 billion, and $14 billion worth of state fiscal impact that's happening to them right now because of undersaving. By the way, at the federal level, the number for each state is very similar. So you can sort of double that and say that that's the combined federal and state level impact. I'm using very rough numbers, but for people who want to pay less in taxes or have more options around how to spend the tax revenue that gets collected, this is one way, is to help people be in a better financial position in the first place by simply allowing them to save at work. It's like very simple.
So I want
Karen,
to.
Or one other provision I think that is of particular interest to this crew is we are looking at how to incorporate emergency savings. I knew that would speak to you.
So is she going to go student loan debt? Is she going to go emergency savings?
Well, student loan debt, that is my colleague Drew. That's Senator Wyden's proposal. And as we're working together, he is championing that. So I think that will be definitely part of the package. But and there are a number of emergency savings proposals out there. We've had so many great conversations through Aspen on this very topic. And what we have learned in the past several years is that there's no one right answer for every workforce in terms of emergency savings. So we are trying to figure out what is the best way to accomplish, like let innovation flow and encourage emergency savings in a way that it discourages leakage, but allows for and encourages maybe some people who are hesitant to save to come in and save. So, we're trying to approach this in a let 1,000 flowers bloom approach. But there are already bipartisan proposals out there. Senators Bennett and Lankford had one, and that is more on the tax side of things. So you might see that in the finance bill. And then we are looking at sidecar options. I know that the banking committee is also looking for a way to do this because, maybe if you are in an employer who is participating in a state auto-IRA program, ERISA isn't the only way that should do this, but I think the expertise on the banking side should handle the ones that are not attached to or adjacent to ERISA plans.
I'm so glad you said that because there is a state plan, Maryland Saves, that is structured differently, right? In terms of the state of Maryland does not have an automatic enrollment requirement, but the Maryland Saves product does have, or tool does have, an emergency savings bucket. Lisa, you have your eye on that one?
Absolutely. So they can be structured different ways, but because the state programs, well, they can be structured different ways, but I'll just say, because the state programs are using Roth IRAs, even without the addition of a bucket, they can do and have served as emergency savings, especially during the pandemic and the period of time of, just turbulence that people have been going through. There is this thinking around whether people will find it more effective to have an account that is earmarked emergency savings versus earmarked retirement, that it will be a little bit more clear what you're doing. So I think, excellent innovation happening on the part of Maryland. And
well,
I just want to,
go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to mention, there's like some really cool stuff going on in the chat. So good information being offered up there too, and good questions and comments.
Indeed. I love this community. They all just jump in. I will say, having just talked to them this morning, our friends in the UK at Nest Insight, they've announced that they're into an opt-out trial for emergency savings attached to the retirement plan. So the minute they have data they can share publicly, we'll of course be bringing that into the US context, because I think that's the big question, is what is the lift that you get when you auto-enroll into emergency savings versus making it opt-in. I think we all suspect, based on the retirement experience, that probably we're going to get better lift out of auto-enroll. But I know we're all sort of waiting on pins and needles. So in the let's say 30 seconds I have left with each of you before Kendra has to leave us for important Hill business. I want to know who are you looking to? Who do you want to see? Which kind of leaders do you want to see sort of step up or out of their zone and do something terrific this year when it comes to retirement savings? Who are you looking to?
Lisa, I was going to let you go first.
You know what? I'll go first. I'm not going to name any names, but I'll just say there are lots of, yeah. So states are not the only place that I focus. However, I absolutely love the success that we're seeing, like real and important traction. So I'll just say to all the state leaders that are continuing to be active, keep up the good fight. This is hard work, but keep it up. Coverage is really critical. Automatic enrollment is really critical. Federally, we're going to get there, but we're not quite there yet.
Well, this is a hard question. I also don't want to name, so I'm going to name the body, Congress. I hope they will step up. We as the collective, I think the committees of jurisdiction are very focused on this. I hope that we have inspired the members who are not on these committees to really focus on this issue and come together at a time where we are very far apart on almost everything else. So hopefully, I think that is my call, to bring everyone together to get this one common, desire across the finish line. I feel like that's the most diplomatic answer I could possibly give.
You're game for anything. I love it, Kendra. Thank you. So thank you so much to Lisa and to Kendra. I'll let you guys go. Thanks for sharing your perspectives. And as Lisa and Kendra turn off their mics and cameras, I will invite Acting Assistant Secretary Ali Kawar from the U.S. Department of Labor to turn on his mic and camera. And so I have promised to call him Ali at his request, but also I have to do the thing where I let you know who he is. So Ali is the Acting Assistant Secretary of the Department of Labor. He was sworn in on January 20th, 2021 as the Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary for the Employee Benefits Security Administration. And he has held a variety of roles related to EBSA and elsewhere in government. And we're just super excited, Ali, to have you with us today. So thank you for joining. And I'm just gonna ask you, you've been in this issue for a while, a good chunk of your career. And I'm curious just what brought you to it and what keeps you in it? What keeps you in retirement savings?
Thanks. First of all, really appreciate the invitation, and it's great to talk to all of you, even though it continues to be weird to talk to people on the screen instead of in a room. But one day that will change, and hopefully in the not too distant future. I will admit I did not, I have, as you might guess, I have 2 young children. They have not told me that they want to grow up and work in employee benefits. I remain hopeful. But when I was their age, I didn't say that either. It is a thing that I've fallen into, but the thing that has kept me here is I just find this space to be so fascinating. You heard from Kendra and Lisa earlier, the interest level states, the bipartisan interest in Congress, but I also find it to be incredibly dynamic. And one of the things that makes it fresh for me is it really intersects in so many things, and we don't always talk about them. When it's a bunch of retirement focused people in a room talking to each other, we don't always step back and think that, at least from the government standpoint, we're talking about financial regulation, consumer protection, any number of work streams and any number of equally fascinating policy areas are all intersecting in this one space.
I mean, I agree.
Sure. I think you might have found the right job for yourself.
Yeah, I think so. So you've also, even your different stops at DOL and elsewhere, you've seen a lot and different facets of this system of our workplace, especially the defined contribution savings system. And I'm curious, just like, broad strokes, what are the changes that you want to see or that you think need to happen if we share the goal of having it be more inclusive, more effective, ultimately with more equitable outcomes?
Yeah, I Again, that's a fantastic question. I think it's important to remember, how much we've advanced the conversation, because I mean this in no way pejoratively, but when ERISA was passed in 1974, that the kinds of questions that Congress was looking at and that the administration in the time was focused on, there were very different kinds of issues. And the way we talk about equity and inclusion now, and even I would say in the past few years, has changed dramatically. I think it's fair to say that, from an administration standpoint, you heard from Kendra earlier, from Congress's standpoint, figuring out how we can expand access is one of the most critically important questions. And I also think it's really important for us to not think of this as a retirement security problem. But Aspen focuses on financial security. This is a financial security problem. And for some people, advancing retirement security, that needs to be a conversation about student loan debt. It needs to be a conversation about looking at food stamps and that program, or credit card debt and what we can do in that space. That again, I mean, that's what makes it very interesting, but it also is important for us, I think, all to not think narrowly about retirement security as just about 401ks and IRAs. It's about how we can make the financial conditions better for people throughout the country.
Even after years of working in this industry and space, it seems like there's an important realization for me has been that part of what makes change so hard is that we all see different things in this system, right? For some people, retirement savings is preloading a source of income in retirement. For others, it's basically self-insurance. There's no long-term care market, insurance market that's functional really in the US. And for others, it's intergenerational wealth building. Do you think that's a problem? Is it hard to make it more accessible because it plays so many roles for people and we can't agree, or is it simpler than that?
I feel like I'm taking a philosophy class now. What does it even mean to have retirement security? I think that's a great question. I mean, I think there's more commonality than difference in this space, right? And I think the question that you asked is a good one, but I think the shared focus that people, I think, regardless of political persuasion, regardless of what aspect of the stakeholder community they represent, everyone agrees that in a voluntary system, figuring out ways that we can incentivize people to act in their own interests, they're beneficial. I think where it becomes trickier is where we start looking at the people that aren't in the system. Because if you enter any conversation like this, everyone will have ideas on how we can improve the system. Unfortunately, a lot of the focus does tend to be on, okay, well, what are we doing on decumulation? Well, that assumes that you have retirement savings to decumulate. What are we doing on any number of the issues, including a lot of the issues that we work on at the Department of Labor? It is kind of by virtue of just what we do, focused on the people that are in. I think where the conversation is increasingly turning to is how we can get more people into the system in the first place. And I don't think that's as much of a philosophical bridge as it used to be.
In the absence of legislation, like what we saw proposed in the fall, what can EBSA, what can DOL do? What's on your priority list for what you can achieve without congressional action?
Yeah, we're doing a lot to improve the system as it stands, but I'm maybe going to focus on a couple of things that might be a little bit more under the radar, that are focused on this question of, how are we addressing issues of equity and inclusion? What can we do in that space? And there are a couple of things, because we have a number of tools available to us. We're thinking about this in the context of, we do a lot of outreach and education. We're in the process of revamping how we do it. For example, making materials available in more languages. We're also in the process of thinking about how we can really have better targeted materials for the small employer community, because we know, the states are doing fantastic things and making access greater in that small employer universe, especially, that traditionally hasn't been well served by the industry. But we think there are things that we can do as well to make more tools available to them, to make more information available to them, to really kind of demystify some of this, because if you own a business of 50 people, making sure that you're setting up a retirement program may not be at the top of your list. But even if it's something that you're prioritizing, we know that folks don't want to spend 40, 60, 80 hours a week figuring out how a 401k works. We need to figure out ways to make all of this more seamless for those employers, so that we can get more people into the system. And I think that the one consequence of that will be addressing some of the equity issues. But we're also thinking about it from the perspective of our enforcement program, for example. I mean, it really is something where across the board, we're trying to identify what we can be doing and how we can be kind of supportive and encouraging of those efforts.
The flip side of getting money in, right, is sort of keeping, well, it's helping people get money out when they need it, right? Mm-hmm. And I think we're all seeing really sort of a surge of innovation and pilots and new products in this space. BlackRock has a lifetime income sort of product in the market. I think I saw TIAA announced one yesterday. What do you make of this? Especially, what do you have your eye on, and what is how should we think about where the lifetime income conversation is going?
So, I mean, it's also an issue we're working on. It is an incredibly important one. The defined contribution system in the U.S. is in some ways the envy of the world, right? When they look at the amount of assets that we have in the system, there are a lot of countries that would be very happy to have the conversations that we have. It works very well for some people. It doesn't work for others. One of the downsides is that we're putting a lot of pressure on individuals, individual decision making about how much to save, what to save in. A lot of the automatic behavioral features that are increasingly become common try to address those problems in the same way that the QDIA regulation and target date funds and that explosion has really addressed another aspect of this issue. But decumulation is an area where we still, I think, haven't really cracked that nut. And again, I mean, the beauty of working in this space is that it's a target-rich environment. There's a lot of problems for us to address, in spite of all the success we've had. And lifetime income is one of them. How can we make sure, given that we're no longer in the universe where people will have a traditional pension and a check for the rest of their lives and their spouse's life, how can we make sure that all of the work that people have done, if they've managed to figure all of it out and have that healthy nest egg, people aren't used to, for most Americans, they're not used to seeing that kind of account balance, and they need help in identifying what they're going to do. So the lifetime income work that we're doing on the disclosures and the illustrations, that's an important part of it. But I also think, we haven't talked about it, but to state the obvious, we're also working on our conflict of interest regulation. That initiative is really an important aspect of the same problem, which is that when you're in a universe where the onus really is on the individual, where they need to rely on experts for advice, how can we make sure that that advice is really the thing that they're bargaining for and the thing that they think they're purchasing at the point where something goes wrong?
What about the money that comes out of the system that maybe shouldn't, or that comes out of the system that other countries don't deal with, right? I'd say the part of our system that is less the envy of the world might be its liquidity, right? Its leakiness. And I just caught the recent stat by Treasury estimating that leakage from the defined contribution system, so usually withdrawals around job change, but could happen at other moments, reduces average balances at age 60 by 30%. That's a lot. That's a lot of money coming out of the system. Is either increased portability or decreased leakage a priority for you? And if so, what can be done?
Yeah, so absolutely. The fix is less straightforward. There have been a lot of solutions that have been offered. We find them very interesting, but I think I can say, we're very concerned about how to address leakage, how to increase portability. We've done some work in this space. I'm guessing everyone on this call is familiar with the Retirement Clearinghouse. That program operates under an exemption that was issued by the Department of Labor. So we're looking at this problem, and we see issues there that we think we might be able to try and address. Some of it might be less regulatory and more in kind of our engagement with the industry and outreach functions than kind of a straight regulation, I think.
I want to pick up on one more issue before we invite in our second cohort of friends. Kendra mentioned in the last conversation about emergency savings and the way that that has emerged as an issue and an opportunity to help 401ks and defined contributions just work better for people who do need access to some liquidity. Are you doing any work on this? Any thoughts on emergency savings? Is it something that you've tracked or have a vision for?
Yeah, so I followed it closely. I wouldn't say it's an issue that we're actively working on this space. It is something that we're watching and monitoring pretty closely, because it goes back to one of the things I said at the beginning of our conversation. We need to, I think, all take a step back and remember that retirement isn't just about retirement. For some people, getting retirement security requires us to first make sure that they have the money to change their tire, fix the broken fridge, whatever kind of thing that life throws in their way. Unfortunately, for a lot of people, this goes back to our conversation about leakage. They will take money out or they won't put money in because of those concerns, right? That fear of not having liquidity available when they need it drives a lot of decisions. And emergency savings, I think, hold a lot of promise for that reason. One of the things I worked on, feels like a very long time ago, was the MyRA program that Treasury set up, because we were partnering with them in a lot of the lead up to having that program go live. And that was one of the things that we were focused on when we were talking about that program. And one of the reasons that we thought the program had such promise, it was kind of the concept of a starter retirement account. The way Lisa was talking about employers graduating to 401ks, there was a similar concept that the MyRA could be a way that people get used to saving for retirement, and it makes them more interested in then talking to their employer about, why don't we have a 401k, but also the ability to have access to something that was a little bit more liquid and not as locked in as a 401k might be.
Do you think the market will create the tools that everybody needs for emergency savings on their own or on its own? Do you see a reason
I'm
for
actually pretty
government to intervene?
optimistic. I'm pretty optimistic on that front, because a lot of the conversation and the movement in the emergency savings space actually isn't coming from the government. It is more coming from the ground up, where large employers are recognizing that this is something they need. I think that's also true in the student loan context, student loan repayment context. Groups like Aspen are making sure that this is on the radar screen of relevant policymakers. But it's interesting because this is not an area where I think you would say, in fairness, that the federal government is leading the conversation. But it is happening. And I think that what we're going to see, because of the massive demand for these kinds of products, is that you're going to see this rolled out across the board. And that as time goes on, it will then move to smaller and smaller establishments. And the way I see our role is to continue to watch, figure out how we can encourage, and make sure that we're identifying any impediments that we're better placed to address.
Awesome. We could talk for much longer than this, but I want to make sure to invite our next two discussants to join us. So I would love for Yemi Rose, the CEO of Color, and Aaron Shum, the CEO of Vestwell, to join us. Hi, Yemi. Hi, Aaron.
Hey,
and I'll actually just, rather than me trying to explain your organizations, I'll just I'll pitch it to Yemi first. Can you give us just a couple of more sentences on Of Color and what you do?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for having me. Of Color, we're a financial wellness platform. We're on a mission to improve the financial health of minority employees. And we do so by mixing technology and research and a little bit of just simple common sense. We essentially built a financial wellness platform that it's available to all employees, but is unapologetically centered around users of color, and really just backed by research that shows that race matters in financial comms.
Great, thank you. And Aaron, over to you. Tell us about Vestwell.
Hi, pleasure to be here. Appreciate it. Yeah, so Vestwell, we're a fintech platform based in New York City, and really what we're out there doing is we're the engine behind the scenes, powering effectively small businesses and savers across the country for those who want to provide a solution to help close the savings gap. So we power about 25,000 businesses right now and about 1 million savers across the country in all 50 states.
Great, thank you. So I will ask you the same question that I asked Ali, and also Kendra and Lisa. There's a lot going on in retirement savings. It is a dynamic space. It's not musty and dusty, as some people may feel, looking at you, Dad. Where are you looking for momentum? What is exciting you out there about whether in the policy or the product innovation space where it's going to help us make a better system?
Yeah, so I guess I'll say from our side, it is exciting, right? I often joke with people that when I'm interviewing, it's like, why do you want to be in retirement? It's so boring, right? But it is really exciting and innovative. And I think technology is finally at a point where we can truly reach everyone in a really effective way and give solutions to help people, to drive better outcomes without having to be experts and not be as confusing and cumbersome and as expensive as it used to be. I also think from the legislative side, just by being out there in the ethos and Secure Act 1.0, 2.0, and all of these pieces that have been put out there just raise awareness, right? And people are clearly taking action, and just the awareness in and of itself, really helps drive the innovation and get people engaged in what they should be doing.
Yeah. So for me, it's attitudes, and it's in the workplace. Obviously, public policy plays a huge role in creating a more inclusive and effective requirement saving system. But we're seeing the most activation and momentum in the workplace, and completely acknowledging that that's mostly what I come across because of the work that we do. But you hear analysts speak about the Great Resignation and the power, at least for a certain class of workers that's been able to work from home, the power that they hold right now. And you look at the type of benefits that companies are also deploying. Walmart paying 100% of tuition, and you saw the announcement this morning on Even. So proper financial wellness platforms are becoming more commonplace. A lot of that is a war for talent, but we're also seeing companies do real reflection in their values, and their companies, I guess, are just really legal agreements between people, and these people, increasingly Gen Z and millennials, are being more vocal about the values of the places that they work. We're seeing real acknowledgement of structural racism. I can have a conversation about white supremacy before in a boardroom, and now you can do that in polite company. So what we're finding is that a lot of folks are really leaning into not just the savings part of this, but the income part of this. How do you help people find slack so that they can ultimately save for retirement? And I think I'm feeling really good about where we're heading.
Well, I want to pick up on that thread about the Great Resignation and worker power. It seems that the headlines just won't stop, right? About this is the moment, right? This is the moment of worker power. A, is that real? B, what will it mean, if anything, for retirement savings? Or are you already seeing it out there?
So I think it's real, but just to be clear, it's real for a certain class of people. It's driven by a ton of factors. Let's not discount that it's much easier to interview for a job when you're at home on Zoom. So it's real for a certain class of people. I think we need to really look at who those people are, and especially through the lens that I look through. These tend to be higher earning workers who are not really folks of color. So it's real to a certain extent. It's causing a lot of employers to take a hard look at how they're treating their people and the benefits that they're offering. But yeah, no, I think certainly you have a lot of companies feeling the pinch from that right now.
Yeah, I agree with Jamie's comments. I mean, I think it's definitely real. There are, we're seeing engagement across the board. Even, one of our partners, so we're the engine inside of Toast, right? It's a food and beverage platform, engaging payroll and benefits and point of purchase. And, if you think of the types of workers in that industry, right? And Toast is really adamant about, hey, we want to make this available to, all food and beverage clients and really getting out there and pushing that. So we're excited, that is happening. Employees are frankly, they just ask about it. Like I think about some of the younger individuals that we bring on to invest well in our company. And, obviously, we have a phenomenal 401k solution, but in our own business, but but joking aside, people ask, like everyone asks, they're like, what are your benefits? Right. And what are you actually doing? And how are you doing this? Right. And I think back to when I was, 22 years old coming out of school, it was like, maybe it was on the list somewhere, but it didn't get asked. So it's nice to see that people are aware about it and asking the right questions.
Okay, so let's talk about access expansion, right? We just heard conversation with Lisa and Kendra about federal approaches, state approaches, et cetera. I have talked to some private sector people who will claim that we don't need legislation. We don't need policy change broadly to universalize or near universalize access to our current retirement savings system. What do you guys think? Are you in that group of optimists? And there's a follow-up question. Will it take policy change? And are we doing enough with the tools we currently have to close access and participation gaps?
So to the first question, I am definitely a proponent of policy change, right? And being a little bit more, it doesn't have to be, absolutely mandated, but even I think Lisa pointed out in one of her comments, like we're seeing an uptick in engagement when, a state says, hey, you need to put something in place, right? And having that, I think, is helpful, right? Because it is something, and this is just human nature, right? We kick the can on these things, right? We're like, I'll worry about this later, right? I'm not going to think about this right now. But being a bit more forceful in that process, I do think has an impact to people, and we are seeing the benefits of it.
Yeah, on my end, I get the optimism in the private sector, or at least for private sector employers. But the reality is that even with this, even if we increase access, you still have, and we have increased access to Secure Act, and you have a lot of employers that are already offering plans to all of their workers, but you still have only 2/3 of private sector workers with real access to these plans. And, of the 42 million who work at small businesses, only 3/4 of them, they don't have access to a plan. So I think a universal mandate is obviously something that we should consider, and we're talking about that now. But I don't want to lose sight of the fact that even when people have access to retirement plans, the outcomes still aren't great, and that's especially true for BIPOC employees. I think when you compare, minority employees to white workers, we obviously have less safe for retirement. We have lower lifetime earnings, less likely to work for one who even offers a plan. And so we see that there's still a gap in accessibility. And that's just looking at private sector workers at all.
Yeah, and just one thing to add to that, kind of along those lines, the accessibility, right? 401k plans, right, have always been accessible. You could walk down the street and go, create one for your company or whatnot at your, local bank or so on. But it's beyond that, right? It's like, okay, now that I have one, and now that I've made one available to my team, my employees, or as an employee, what do I do now, right? And that's intimidating for people, right? To have to make that decision when this is generally the first dollar they've ever contributed and saved for in their life, right? And how do you help people make those better decisions and guide them through that process and feel confident and comfortable in their decisions without having to be experts? I think we've, as an industry, have done a bad job of making this so confusing. And so, all the acronyms and everything that gets thrown at people, and people just freeze. They're like, I'm going to sound like an idiot because I don't know what I'm going to do. And they don't do anything, right? So the more we can, I don't want to say dumb it down, it's not the right way, but give people tools where they're really comfortable in making those decisions. Just following that, I think, is really important, and that will drive better outcomes at the end of it.
I think that one other thing I want to add, I mean, Aaron, I might disagree with you, because for me, I feel like 401k just rolls off the tongue. But it's important to remember that there have been universal access possibilities essentially since the dawn of ERISA, right? IRAs were signed into law shortly after. 401k didn't quite exist yet. But we've had a number of solutions, and we've tried to address this problem of coverage a number of times over the years, right? So right now, a lot of the conversation is about PEPs, but PEPs are like the most recent innovation, and we've been trying again and again to try and address coverage and to move the needle. And those numbers have, as a percentage of the population, the private sector workforce, they really haven't moved all that much. And Congress has tried a number of different things. The simple IRA didn't exist once upon a time. Part of the motivation for creating that was to make sure that there were opportunities available that were kind of simple, and it's literally in the name, for the employer. So I want to be optimistic. I want to say that goal is within reach. I just think that history has told us that we're probably going to need to do something more. And maybe PEPs are that solution that finally is going to get us there. Probably too early to see.
So that is my next question. Are we, have we seen evidence, or will we see evidence that MEPs and PEPs, these are multiple employer plans, pooled employer plans for the to Aaron's point, for the non-acronym fluent among us. Are we sleeping on these? Are these gonna rise up and be an access expansion machine? Is there a scenario where that happens?
So transparently, I'll be very candid. I've been quite public about my opinion with this. I am not, we are, a registered PPP, right? And we can do that for our partners that want to offer that to their clients. Personally, I don't think that necessarily solves the problem, right? I think it's been a bit of, I think some of the traditional legacy providers have really pushed for it because they are tied to a system that will never allow them to scalably and effectively, penetrate the small market and help serve those clients at scale, and still, obviously remain profitable in doing so. I do think there are factors to it that make it easier for an employer. But I also think that as an employer, just as we are as individuals, we have different needs at different stages of our lives, and those take different shapes. And that is something that's very hard to do in that MEP-PEP world. And I feel like people are being shoved into a box that they don't necessarily fit into or won't fit into later. And then it's very hard to change the shape of that box. I do like the notion of the group of plans that are defined contribution groups, whatever name ends up sticking. And if there's the ability to file, a single 5,500 around there, I do think that can be very impactful. And I think we would see a huge uptick in adoption with that. But the MEP-PEP world, I just don't see it really going anywhere in any huge, meaningful way.
Any other thoughts on MEPs and PEPs?
I may be slightly more optimistic than Aaron. I do think that there's going to be take up. I think for me, the biggest question is, do we see a transition of the existing marketplace to PEPs or DCGs or whatever form it is, and really what we've done is just kind of move the pieces around the board, or do we actually see this being the thing that the proponents, and I think the people that are very excited about it, are rightfully excited about, which is expanding coverage. I would like to think that this is the thing that gets people in the system.
So I want to pick up on something Aaron said and maybe connect it to Yemi's work. And I thought I heard you say, Aaron, correct me if I'm wrong, that there's some degree of customization or personalization required in retirement savings if we are to help people not only get in, but use the plan and benefit from its features because it needs to be customized a bit. Yay me, I feel like that's a little, I mean, I don't know if you're all the way to customization, but I guess I want to ask both of you, to me, when I hear personalization, I think tech. I think what is coming, what could be coming, what tools are out there. What do you see coming down the road about the way technological innovation could change, support, improve the economics of retirement savings for Americans, especially in the workplace?
Yeah, so I'll jump in there. So I think personalization is extremely important, right? And it's never been easier to start a fintech company. You have solutions out there that can tackle any financial problem that you're facing, whether it's savings or ease of investing, right? So it's very easy to do now. And I think in terms of retirement, and retirement savings, I think the industry has for a long time kind of been like, if you build it, they will come. They've had that mentality. But we must build with intention to capture the attention of the employees. And in order to do that, you're going to have to know your employees, right? So these programs are only as good as their engagement. And I focus on employees of color, and I know that for a fact that we have lower engagement often because we don't feel that the messaging speaks to us. And also there are unique attributes to our lives. For example, high income Black and Hispanic workers at all income levels kind of believe it's more important to help friends and family now than to save for their own retirement, right? So getting into really surveying your employees, getting into figuring out what struggles they're personally having, and then using the data that that's out there that shows that real personalization, including acknowledgement of the struggles of folks of color, can really help to drive down and aid us in the communication about these plans and help us to increase the uptick in participation. I mean, this is not to say that there are not other major elements such as income and the ability to pay for these plans that really hinder us. But I think personalization is one of the few levers that we have that can really drive good outcomes.
Yeah, and I would totally agree. I think that's spot on comments. But when I think of personalization, right, and the selfish world we all live in now, right, where it's like me, what's for me? How is this? I want it instantaneously. I look at it, I think the first step of what we've put in place, right, is we built a proprietary managed account solution, right, open architecture from investments, but it creates a level of personalization for an individual around investing, and we've built it within the framework of a wellness solution. Right. And starting to capture additional information around an individual to, again, drive them to make better decisions in a personalized format. And we tie it back, and this is still not fully built yet, but this is the direction we're going. So we obviously have a lot of data, right? We pull all the payroll information from payroll providers and have all these integration points, and we can use that to help individuals make better decisions. Where if, there are times, right, when a company may have a 401k, but maybe you shouldn't be in a 401k based on, how much money you're making at the business, right? And, maybe you should be in an HSA and an IRA, right? So, being able to use that to help people make better decisions and then drive a personalized kind of account structure, I think is really important. And then, then the investments would follow after. So that's kind of the direction we're heading, and thinking about, okay, how do we incorporate emergency savings and health savings and 529s and ABLE programs and all of these different structures under one single infrastructure that we've built. So, and I think if you can do that and then enable that through the workplace or even on an individual basis, but if you're doing it on a payroll deducted, tax deferred, tax exempt basis, that's where you're going to have the greatest impact.
So Kendra referenced Senator Wyden's proposal around student loan debt, the ability for an employer to match an employee's student loan debt repayment with a 401k match, right, and retain the tax advantage of that match for the employer. That has been in Secure 2.0. Student loan debt is hot, right? It grows bigger every minute. Student loan debt payments have been on pause since, throughout the pandemic, but are at least projected to be sort of turned back on again in May. What do you think? Is the 401k system an appropriate or good or positive place to be helping people sort of manage that? How important is that link between student loan debt and retirement savings in your view? And can tech help us fix this somehow?
Personally, I think it's huge. I frequently tell folks, the student loan debt issue is really a racial justice issue when you look at the amounts of debt that people of color hold and the time it takes us to pay off. I think we need to tackle all the barriers that hold people back from saving from retirement, and student debt is a massive one, right? So many people have to choose between saving for retirement and making debt payments. And, again, this kind of goes back to you listening to your workforce and trying to find out, is there a significant chunk of your employee base that is having difficulty managing this debt? And if the answer is yes, then you need to get creative about restructuring their benefits and offering help to pay this down. And I think, the student debt proposal in Secure 2 will make this much easier for employers to do.
Yeah. I mean, as a person who had a lot of student debt from both undergrad and grad school, it was always on my mind, right? And what am I going to be able to save, and how am I going to do this? Especially too, even on our platform, right? The average age of an individual is about 30 years old, right? And a lot of people are still carrying debt right at that point. So being able to put something in place, and there are some good solutions out there. I think, we're kind of in the build, buy, partner evaluation phase of what we're going to do, but we're going to do something as a platform and put something in place there. And I look at it kind of barbell, right? You have the student loan issue you have to solve, right, before you ever start thinking about the DCUM side, right, in the guaranteed income side. As much as I'm a huge fan of that, I just based on the demographics of the folks on our platform, I want to shift to the former and just try to solve for that.
I mean, it's always, sorry, Ellie.
No, I was just going to add one thing, which is that there's a part of this connection that we didn't touch on that I think is very important. When we're thinking about education and how we're trying to, convince people to save for retirement, we often tell them time is on your side. The younger you start, the better off you'll be. Those things are really in tension, because the time when people have that student loan debt and they need to focus on paying that down is the time when really is like the best window that they'll have to save for retirement. And a system where we're waiting until you're getting close to being able to make catch-up contributions to be the first time when you really have the financial ability to save for retirement and start maxing out your contributions. I mean, that's an important thing to be thinking.
And one wonders, one who is about the same age as Ali, I have also children's art that I've moved forward in my office. You're saving for retirement at the same time that you are potentially paying down student loan debt, at the same time that you are trying to save for your kids for college. Why are those all on separate platforms in my life? It's the same thing I'm doing, right? I don't know. It's almost like Aaron. It's almost like somebody should build a holistic platform that helps me do all those things. I'm looking at you.
It's a brilliant idea. So, I mean, it's true. Like the way I look at it is like, I think of it like air traffic controller, like where should that next best dollar land? Right. And how can we help people to do that? And it's important. Yeah. And it's so hard, right? And you think about everything you do, and especially at those moments in your life where it's like, I need to do everything right now because this is when I should be doing it, right? Or I need to be doing it, but you're like, I can't. So how do you help people through that? Because it can be overwhelming.
Right. And it is all, whenever we talk about student loan debt, I feel like, and Yemi, please feel free to comment here, but it's always worth saying that it is all the data reveal that is particularly damaging for multiple reasons to Black borrowers, right? Or people or Black people with student loan debt. Does that make student loan debt repayment support of some kind a racial equity play for employers?
100%, I think. I mean, look, we're talking a lot about savings and obviously retirement savings, but we need to focus additionally on helping folks to reduce the debt that they have. And student debt is considered good debt, but at the same time, for people of color especially, it's an albatross. around us that prevents us from, I mean, forget retirement, forget it. It prevents us from really living full lives. You look at just the choices that folks would make. Lawyers out there, how many lawyers have I spoken to who they're working at white shoe law firms and they want to really get into social justice, but they can't because they have student loan debt that they need to pay back. Just the ability to help us live full lives. I think it's, you know, it's a discussion that we need to you know, put at the center of this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, thank you. So I'm going to transition to something I asked Ali about in our one-on-one conversation about portability and leakage, right? It's important for us to keep money in if we can, right? So that it continue to benefit from growth and compounding over time. It's notable, I think, that recently both the NAACP and the National Urban League came out in support of auto portability as a fix for this problem. And what do you guys think? What is the right way to fix the some or all, or maybe none, if that's where you philosophically fit, to fix some of the leakage that's coming out of our defined contribution system? Thoughts?
Yeah. So from my stance, auto portability is a huge step in the right direction. Leakage disproportionately impacts people of color. You know, nearly half of employees of color cash their retirement savings when they change jobs. I know I did several times, which, you know, and I know better. You know, but we need to take it a step further, right? You know, even just looking at my personal situation, and we need to address the root of the leakage, which is really a cash flow problem. I think income volatility is a huge issue, especially now during the pandemic. You know, a worker who lost their job is undoubtedly going to tap into their retirement account if they have no other choice. You know, and how we can address this, at least in the workplace, is by doing what we're doing here, which is you know, advocating for employer-sponsored emergency savings account. You know, there are many employers today that are beginning to offer these solutions as an option within their 401k plan, and giving workers an option to contribute after-tax dollars to these.
Yeah, just quickly, I think I love the idea that, you know, creating some level of portability around it. I think if, you know, thinking through the legislative side, if it doesn't have to be necessarily through that, or even it could just be a group of firms that get together that basically create a standard protocol for rollover movements, right? And being able to do it. It is so painful to roll your assets over, right? So painful. And I'm sure that everyone here has done it at some point in their career. And you know, if we can make that fluid and easy and portable and just, hey, here and push it out, that would be great. And then, you know, on the other side of it, I do think the emergency savings aspect is will be a big help in helping stop some of the leakage as well. So, and putting that in place and just making people aware and having it be accessible, right? I deal with this with my wife, right? She's a genius, but like, she is not, she's in the biotech life science world, right? So her head is there, right? And she, you know, and I ask her about her 401k, she's like, I have no idea where they are, right? They're just floating out there, right? And it drives me bananas, especially considering what I do for a living, right? And, you know, but it's natural, right? And so creating some element where it's accessible and easy to take with you and notify where you are at all times is really important.
So you mentioned HSAs, Aaron, and we have a question. My team is monitoring the very active chat. Good thing, because I couldn't do it. You mentioned HSAs, and we talk about too, Ali, you and I talked about how, you know, the retirement savings system does different things for different people. One of those uses is self-insurance against, you know, significant healthcare expenses that are uncovered by Medicare in retirement. And I guess I'm wondering, we are asking people in this country to assess their own risk, to assess their own longevity risk, but we are asking them to assess their own sort of healthcare risk. Can we do a better job of this as a country? Should we do this differently? Seems like people are struggling to get it right out there on how much money I will need to self-insure in case of I live forever, or in case of I have a catastrophic health situation, I need long-term care. Any thoughts on the system broadly, and how does that connect to retirement savings, if at all? Or HSA is the solution?
I wish I was about to tell you that I'd figured out the answer. But this is a huge problem, right? And we were talking about decumulation earlier. This is, I think, one of the big reasons that even when employers offer lifetime income products, you don't see the kind of take up that the experts would expect, because people are really worried. Well, what about the fact that I'm going to need some kind of medical care in the future? And people don't have the kind of assets otherwise available where they feel secure that, okay, well, I can draw down those things. It's kind of their retirement savings are the thing that they're needing to use for insurance in a lot of different ways, including just the core of what it's supposed to do. And you mentioned earlier, we don't really have a functioning long-term care market, which would address a huge amount of these issues. I also think, there's one, I don't know if innovation is the right word because it's a little older than brand new, but the kind of deferred annuity approach holds a lot of promise for addressing that kind of psychological concern, right? You're not going to need this money now. You're not going to need it in 5 years. But we can make sure that when you're at the point where the longevity risk is the thing that you're concerned about, then there'll be some kind of stream of income available to you. A lot of this is just figuring out how to address the psychological barriers that the system kind of creates, because we put so much of the onus on the individuals, as Aaron was saying, that kind of decision paralysis that can too often result from that.
I wish I had a good answer. That's far better than I'll have, but but I do like the idea of some sort of guaranteed income structure or annuitized product that can act as a facility in that long-term care. And I think a lot of it too is just making, I think incorporating wellness and planning within the workplace where people are, where they have the greatest impact in saving. And it's, generally where that first dollar originates from. So putting that in the workplace and having it accessible, I think will help people at least start thinking about it. And then, I think it's on all of us to start making people more aware of what they need to plan for.
Yeah. And look, I come from a communications background, a financial comms background, and I'm running a fintech, and it has been an extremely good asset for me in terms of tackling some of the problems of how you communicate to folks what their future lives are going to look like. Right? We're hardwired to think about accumulation and things like that. We're not necessarily programmed to think about how this is going to extend for the rest of our lives, whether it relates to healthcare spending or just spending in general. And I think you have this is where tech comes in, right? This is where personalization comes in. You can actually, in several ways, illustrate for folks. And I know that there's been legislation that has passed that has required us to really show the waterfall. But the more we can help folks to get outside of the moment and to see what their future selves is going to look like, the more we'll be able to have them take action.
I have a specific question that's come in for you, Ali. The question is, in the vein of wealth building generally, right? If you think of retirement savings as one of the tools to build household wealth, another one is employee equity, right? That is beginning to see some traction and some new innovation, beyond the ESOP. So the question was, how is the DOL looking to expand access to employee equity as a retirement benefit? Is that on your radar at all?
Yeah, I mean, so we have long been supportive of ESOPs, which is the predominant way that we interact with these issues, at least from my agency's perspective and my part of the Department of Labor, because a lot of the other forms of employee equity aren't necessarily covered by ERISA. But I think the question is really, when you're looking at an ESOP, I mean, obviously there are all the fairly complex questions that we have to deal with in our enforcement cases about whether or not the ESOP is being run in the right way, whether the transactions were structured correctly. But I don't think you would see anyone at my agency who would disagree that a well-run ESOP is a good thing for the employees, that'll lead to more productivity, all the kinds of things that we hear about, and is a tremendous wealth building tool. It just needs to be well run and operated in accordance with the law.
Fair enough. I have one lightning round question to close us out here. If you look out, let's just say 10 years into the future at our retirement savings system, what is one thing that you see on the horizon that could really surprise us in good ways or bad ways? What is looming on the horizon, or you believe could be looming on the horizon, that you have your eye on when it comes to changing and evolving this system? Big trends, comets.
Well, so I think the portability is something that will be solved for. I think the pace at which we'll be able to move dollars around within this ecosystem will rapidly evolve, right? Just from a rollover, even via paycheck, right? Think of it, the ACH protocol, and how kind of archaic that is in many ways, right? And being able to move those dollars faster. And I think that will transfer over to this space and rollovers and whatnot. I think eventually we're probably closer to like 10 to 15. I don't think it's 5 years away. But if you have a blockchain structure for moving money across providers, I think is really powerful. And I think will be very helpful for individuals. So it's too early now, because to get folks to adopt it would be too challenging. But I think there are players that will start to adopt. And I know there's folks out there, I think, kind of already working through some of those things.
I'm gonna just say the obvious and agree with Aaron on that in terms of the movement that's happening in tech. I think there's a lot of promise and a lot of what we're seeing happening in blockchain. There are really good companies out there, fintech companies that are doing innovative work. Shout out to the guys at LendTable, taking simple interest loans and enabling people to fund their 401ks to the max employee match in a way that's cost effective for them and benefits them in the long term. I mean, you have a lot of companies out there and real innovators that are I mean, this is gold for us, right? It's a really hard problem. It's one where we talked earlier about the portability. If there's a way that technology can solve for that, I mean, it could be a game changer. So I'm excited about what the tech world has in store and what I'm seeing out there in the ecosystem.
Yeah, I'd agree. I mean, I think the obvious answer is the obvious answer because it's also the right answer. What the technology sector is able to do when they intersect with this, looking also at parts of the industry that have seen maybe a little bit less fintech disruption, like the insurance industry, like long-term care. I think there's promise that some of these challenges that we've seen as unsolvable before, we might be able to crack them.
I love the optimism. I want to thank all three of you, Yemi, Ali, and Aaron, for joining us today. So thank you so much for sharing your perspectives with us. I'll go ahead and close us out. You all are free to virtually step off the stage. Just a few items of housekeeping to close us out today. I previewed at the top that we have published a handful of reports, some briefs about our retirement savings system and some of the data that tells the story of where the opportunities are. Let's put it that way. And so we do encourage you to push to use those reports as tools in your own work, especially to expand the tent of leaders who care about our retirement savings system. I also want us to be able to push out a report that I think will be of interest. It's about wealth building generally, and it's called Foundations of a New Wealth Agenda, a research primer on wealth building for all. And I think it leverages insights from people with low incomes and low assets about what wealth does for them and their lives, what it means, and really is the beginning of a series of publications we'll be pushing out into the world on what it will take to develop a new wealth agenda for America. So my final ask to you is, if you're not signed up, we'd love for you to join our retirement newsletter, so you can stay up to date on the events, dialogues, resources, tools, and publications from us and those we partner with. So thank you so much for your time today. I hope it's warmer where you are than where I am. And I hope you and yours continue to stay healthy. Have a great day.